Ukraine's fierce defense has kept Russia at bay for over 2 years, but a new, darker chapter is unfolding. In a shocking twist, North Korea, the world's most isolated and dangerous regime, has joined the war, sending thousands of troops to reinforce Putin's crumbling forces. Now Ukraine faces not just Russia, but another unpredictable and dangerous enemy on the battlefield. But how did we even get here? How has North Korea become involved in the conflict? And what does this dangerous alliance mean for the future of the war? In this video, we'll dive into these questions and more. Let's start with the arrival of North Korean troops. On October 16, 2024, the BBC released a report repeating claims from a Ukrainian military intelligence source that North Korea has sent a unit numbering 3,000 soldiers into Russia. That news sent shockwaves throughout the global community. Moscow and Pyongyang look like they've created a military alliance akin to a tiny NATO, and they're now working together to help Putin achieve his goals in Ukraine. At least that's how it appears to Ukraine. Russia, as is so often the case, has immediately dismissed the reports. Kremlin mouthpiece Dmitry Peskov went on record to claim that no North Korean troops have entered Russia, and they certainly won't be entering Ukraine. This is not only British intelligence, it's also American intelligence. They report it all the time, they don't provide any evidence. Peskov's message is clear. The West is making up stories once again to cast Russia as the villain. Only they're not stories. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has already spoken about North Korea entering the war, with South Korea backing him up. It says a North Korean deployment in Ukraine is highly likely. It's not a question of when that will happen, it's more about how many soldiers North Korea is going to send. The BBC spoke to a source in Russia's Far East to confirm that the North Korean troops are arriving, and with that source claiming they had. The new soldiers were being stationed in a Urasisk military base just north of Vladivostok, though the source also claimed their numbers were absolutely nowhere near 3,000. Maybe fewer troops are arriving than anticipated, or maybe the 3,000 soldiers are being spread among different Russian bases that the source doesn't know about. Nevertheless, this is worrying news for Ukraine and its Western backers. The move, however many soldiers it involves, signifies that the military ties between Russia and North Korea are strengthening. And if it involves 3,000 today, who's to say that there won't be many thousands more in the future? It may already be more than 3,000. On October 10th, just a week before the BBC's report, The Guardian claimed that North Korea was deploying military engineers to help Russia target Ukraine with its ballistic missiles. A Ukrainian source claimed there were already dozens of North Korean soldiers behind Russian lines, many working in teams to support launcher systems for KN-23 missiles. If those missiles sound familiar, it may be because August 2024 brought with it reports that Russia had used this North Korean missile to launch a strike against Ukraine, with a KN-23 confirmed to have killed a father and his 4-year-old son. Maybe those engineers were part of the 3,000 soldiers North Korea sent later in October. Or it may be that North Korea has been sending people to help the Russians for far longer than anybody realized. Worse yet for Ukraine, the numbers may already be higher than 3,000 North Korean soldiers. A day after the BBC's report, the Lowy Institute dug deeper into the claims that North Korea is sending soldiers to Russia. It found that the Washington Post believes that several thousand North Koreans have not only arrived, but are receiving military training from Russia. It also covered a report from the Kyiv Independent in which a Western diplomat told the Ukrainian news outlet the number is actually far higher than 3,000. North Korea has sent 10,000 soldiers, though the diplomat couldn't provide any insight into who these soldiers were or what their roles would be in the Russian military. Whether it's 3,000, 10,000, or merely a few dozen fighters, nothing changes the simple fact. North Korea is sending active members of its military into Russia. Now Ukraine faces a war against two countries instead of one. With that understanding of what's likely happening, we come to another question. Why? Why is Pyongyang sending soldiers to fight in a war that's thousands of miles away from its territory and likely has no obvious impact on the North Korean regime? The answer likely lies in something that happened back in June 2024. In that month, news emerged that Putin and North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un had signed a cooperative military pact that included an interesting clause. Each side would be duty-bound to come to the aid of the other if it was attacked. If that sounds similar to Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, which ensures a collective defense is mounted by all of NATO's members if any one of those members is attacked, you'd be right. Russia appeared to have created its own mini-NATO, with a military power that shares its vision of what a non-Western guided world could be. The pact naturally signaled alarm bells in the West. Kim described it as an alliance, with the world being left to speculate what this pact could really mean for the future. The Guardian suggested it cleared the way for Russia and North Korea to exchange technology and weapons. It noted that US intelligence believed Russia was already sending ballistic missile and nuclear submarine technology to Pyongyang, with North Korea having already been confirmed to be sending weapons to Russia. There was even talk of nuclear weapons, with the Biden administration apparently being concerned that Russia was going to help North Korea make the final push toward arming its submarines with nuclear warheads. All of this talk of technology transfers led to the cooperative defense aspect of the pact being swept under the rug. And why wouldn't it be? In June 2024, Putin's special military operation was contained in Ukraine. There was no suggestion that the war would extend into Russian territory, as Putin's red lines appeared to be holding strong. Then came August, and everything changed. On August 6th, Ukraine launched a small invasion into the Russian oblast of Kursk. Russia claimed to have put down an incursion that involved around 300 Ukrainian soldiers and a handful of tanks and armored vehicles, but those reports ended up being false. Ukraine had successfully overrun Russia's border defenses. It was advancing into Kursk, taking territory along the way, and Putin appeared to be doing nothing about it. 2 weeks into that incursion, Russia has been forced to evacuate around 200,000 people from the oblast as Ukraine moved deeper in. Now, Ukraine is at least 18 miles into Russian territory, with its soldiers having taken 93 villages and settlements while controlling around 460 square miles of Russian territory, around double what Russia has taken in Ukraine between January and August 2024. At the time, many in the international community saw the Kursk invasion as a massive gamble that paid off for Ukraine. Zelensky now had a hefty bargaining chip for future negotiations with Russia and, more importantly, from a war psychology perspective, he'd shown Putin and his people that the war Russia's leader began could arrive on his own country's territory. Ukraine only seems to have grown bolder in the months since. On September 10th, news emerged of another attack on Russian territory. This one wasn't focused on an out-of-the-way oblast that Russia's most affluent citizens could ignore. Ukraine struck Moscow, along with several other Russian territories. The attack lasted for an entire night and saw Ukraine launch 144 drones at its enemy, in the largest strike of its kind Kyiv had attempted since the war began. The drone attack forced over 50 flights to be diverted away from Moscow and killed at least one person. Ukraine also used its drones to destroy portions of high-rise buildings and even flew them directly over some of Putin's presidential palaces in a move clearly intended to remind Russia's leader that Ukraine had the means to hurt him in the city where he feels most safe. Again, this attack was a victory for Ukraine. It had crossed the biggest red line of all, striking Russia in its own territory. The problem is that what's happening in Kursk and Ukraine's Moscow strike may reveal why North Korean soldiers are now arriving in Russia. Think back to the pact Russia signed with North Korea in June. Each is now obligated to come to the other's defense if they face an attack on their own territory. That's exactly what the Kursk invasion was to Russia. Putin is one to play around with semantics. He'll happily ignore the 2.5 years of Russia invading Ukraine to point to the Kursk incursion as an attack on Russia. And North Korea, duty-bound by the pact it signed, is coming to Russia's aid in the same way that all NATO countries would come to the aid of one of their allies. The Kursk invasion opened up a military can of worms that nobody, least of all Ukraine, expected. It was as much an invitation for North Korea to get involved in the war as it was a successful invasion that took Russian territory. The more conspiratorially minded among you may even posit that Putin allowed the Kursk invasion to happen so he could lean on North Korea to supply soldiers. Russia's border defenses were weak, and Putin still doesn't seem to be doing a whole lot to push Ukraine out of Kursk. Maybe Russia's leader planned all of this from the start. That's probably giving Putin too much credit. After all, for as worrying as the news is about North Korea sending thousands of soldiers into Russia, it's hardly the first example of the two countries cooperating. Even before they signed their pact, North Korea was sending weapons and people to Russia. In February 2024, Al Jazeera reported on the South Korean Defense Ministry's claims that North Korea has sent up to 6,700 containers carrying millions of artillery shells and other munitions to Russia since September 2022. Those containers don't come for free, claims South Korea. Russia has been exchanging food, raw materials, and parts for the shells. Shin Won-sik, the South Korean defense minister, believes that North Korea has used these containers to deliver over 3 million 122mm artillery shells, or possibly around 500,000 152mm shells. It could possibly be a mix of the two, Shin claimed, and you can say that at least several million shells have been sent. He also claimed that North Korea's artillery production facilities are running at full swing for Russia, even as munitions factories elsewhere in the country dropped to 30% of their typical output due to a lack of raw materials. Time magazine expanded on these claims in June 2024, around the same time that Russia and North Korea signed their defensive pact, with Shin saying the number of containers was then closer to 10,000. South Korea's defense minister also said Putin is expected to seek closer security cooperation with North Korea, especially military supplies such as artillery shells that are necessary to seize a chance to win. A sign of desperation from a Russian leader quickly running out of weapons? Perhaps. But this mass transfer of artillery shells shows us that Ukraine has been fighting North Korea indirectly for most of 2024. The arrival of North Korean boots on the ground in its territory seems to be a natural expansion of the deepening defense relationship between Russia and its more fervent ally. You can also add the KN-23 missiles we spoke about earlier into the mix. The great irony appears to be that Russia, once one of the world's top weapon manufacturers, now has to rely on a country many perceive to be much weaker to keep its military stocked up. North Korean manpower arriving in Russia also isn't as new an occurrence as it seems. In April 2024, The Diplomat published a piece claiming that in January 2023, North Korea started sending people into the Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine's Donbas region. Those people weren't soldiers, they were workers, The Diplomat claims, who arrived to help Russia start rebuilding the infrastructure it had spent 2 years destroying. Still, the arrival of these North Korean workers was worrisome for Ukraine, as it showed Putin was coming up with ways to overcome Russia's labor shortages. Ship in workers from another country, and Russia is able to send more of its own people into the Ukrainian meat grinder. Again, an indirect example of the alliance between Russia and North Korea. But it's also yet another stepping stone to where we are today, as North Korean soldiers are slowly trickling into the country to fight on Russia's behalf. Zelensky now has to face up to a truth that he may not have wanted to confront before. Ukraine is no longer at war with Russia alone. It's also fighting North Korea. Let's take a step back and examine what that might mean for Ukraine as Putin's special military operation moves into 2025. North Korea is far from a military powerhouse in the same way as Russia. Global Firepower, or GFP, which ranks 145 of the world's military nations annually based on their military strength, says North Korea is 36th out of 145. Not a bad ranking for sure, but nowhere close to Russia at second in the rankings or Ukraine at 18th. The country's weaponry is certainly nothing to write home about. As Business Insider pointed out in September 2023, even the artillery shells and missiles North Korea has sent to Russia so far are of generally poor quality. The UK former ambassador to North Korea, John Everard, highlighted this, saying that most of the weapons Russia has received from North Korea are in very poor condition. But condition may not be the main factor here. As long as North Korea's artillery shells explode, Russia isn't going to be too bothered where they land, as long as they hit Ukraine. The numbers game is more important, and if there's one thing North Korea can provide to Russia, it's more of what it needs to continue its bombardments. Coming back to GFP's statistics, it points out that North Korea has 3,215 tanks, which is the second most tanks of any military nation. Those tanks won't be as much use to North Korea when fighting against Ukraine given they're thousands of miles away. But if Pyongyang can find a way to ship those tanks to Moscow along with soldiers, Russia suddenly has a whole new fleet of metal monstrosities it can field in Ukraine to supplement Putin's already tank-heavy strategy. North Korea's navy, though 505 ships strong, isn't going to be much use either. The vast majority of those ships are patrol vessels, and even if North Korea sent ships over, they wouldn't get anywhere. Entry into the Black Sea is blocked by Turkey, which is why Russia hasn't been able to supplement a fleet that's lost a third of its ships to Ukrainian missiles and drone strikes. North Korea also has a decent number of aircraft, with an air force that ranks 11th in the world for its sheer number of assets, at 476 planes and choppers. But again, Russia really isn't using its air force beyond launching glide bombs from behind the front lines, and it has plenty of planes of its own. So how can Russia use North Korea to fight against Ukraine? The simple answer is people. A lot of people. North Korea's military has 1.32 million active personnel, placing it fourth in the world for sheer manpower, and putting its military on par with Russia's when it comes to how many people it contains. The country also has 560,000 reserve soldiers and 100,000 paramilitary fighters, and it's here that Ukraine faces a serious problem. North Korea's troops are likely poorly trained, they may even be under-equipped, but they come in heavy numbers, and if there's one thing that Putin has shown us during the war, it's that he's willing to sacrifice hundreds of thousands of people to achieve his objectives. Ukraine going to war with North Korea will result in thousands more North Korean soldiers arriving in Russia, ready for Putin to send into his meat grinder. The first 3,000 to 10,000 being reported are likely just the beginning. North Korea may send tens of thousands more because it views a Russian victory in Ukraine as a win over the Western hegemony that both Russia and North Korea want to eliminate. And so we come to another question. With North Korean boots set to go on the ground in Ukraine, exactly how does Russia intend to use its new influx of soldiers? The Kyiv Independent fielded some opinions in the wake of its own reports that 10,000 North Korean troops had arrived in Russia. First, it quotes UK's former defense attaché to Moscow, John Foreman, as claiming that the disclosure that North Korean troops may appear on the front line is a direct consequence of catastrophic Russian casualties. Again, it's Putin's meat grinder approach at play. Foreman believes that the arriving North Korean soldiers offer questionable military effectiveness at best, meaning they will be cannon fodder for Ukrainian defenders. Therein lies our first clue to Putin's approach. He's not looking for talented military operatives. The North Korean soldiers aren't specialists that he can use to conduct any sort of complex operations within Ukraine. They're bodies he can use however he sees fit. And the odds are high that the thousands of North Koreans arriving in Russia are going to be treated similarly to many of Russia's conscripts and contract soldiers. They'll be sent to the front lines to absorb Ukrainian bullets. There's a twisted logic to this approach, with Russia using its soldiers to slowly whittle away at Ukraine's ammunition supplies, essentially eroding its defenses rather than overcoming them with superior military tactics. The approach also demonstrates how little either Putin or Kim care for the lives of their own people. North Korea's leader likely knows that he sent thousands of soldiers to die. He'll probably send thousands more, and he'll know that being fed into Putin's meat grinder is all they're really good for and won't even miss the lost soldiers. After all, North Korea has mandatory military service. The entire country is heavily militarized, with all North Korean men being duty-bound to serve in the country's military for 10 years, while women have to serve for 8. Article 86 of the country's constitution even says, national defense is the supreme duty and honor of citizens, which essentially sets North Korea's people up to die at the behest of their leader for any military goal Kim can imagine. Christoph Bluth, who works as a professor of international relations and security at the University of Bradford, agrees with this opinion. He claims that North Korea can provide just two things to Russia. One is cannon fodder, he says, with the other being the massive arsenal of ammunition dating back to the 1950s that North Korea has stockpiled for decades. It's that sort of ammunition that's been making its way into Russia for most of the war, particularly in the case of artillery shells. And given Putin's extensive use of Soviet-era equipment to fight against Ukraine, this ancient ammunition stockpile is actually far more valuable to Russia's leader than it would first appear. Bluth also assesses the quality of the North Korean soldiers heading into Ukraine. They spend a lot of time in the army, he says when referring to the decade-long national service most soldiers go through. But the quality of equipment they have and the quality of training are rather dubious. But let's dig deeper into the operational aspect of this soldier transfer. Just where does Russia intend to use its new North Korean soldiers against Ukraine? Kursk seems to be the most obvious answer. The Kyiv Independent says that the North Korean soldiers will likely go through a training period, after which they'll be sent to Kursk to defend against the Ukrainian incursion that began in August 2024. The BBC's James Waterhouse backs this opinion, noting that many of the 3,000 soldiers North Korea has sent ended up in Ulan-Ude, which is close to Russia's border with Mongolia and offers a potential path into Kursk. If this is the case, then perhaps Russia is using North Korean soldiers in the spirit of the defensive pact it signed with its ally. Maybe they won't end up in Ukraine itself, meaning Zelensky only has to worry about fighting them on the soil of the country Ukraine has invaded. That's likely not the case. Posting on the social media platform Telegram, Ukraine's counter-disinformation department leader, Andriy Kovalenko, says that Ukraine can't rule out the possibility that these North Korean soldiers will soon find themselves stationed in the Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine. We may already be seeing that given the reports that state North Korean laborers are being sent to the Donbass. It's not a huge stretch to say that soldiers will follow. Putin's plan may be to use North Korean manpower to push Ukraine out of Kursk before sending those embattled soldiers, along with any others that Kim sends his way, to the front lines in Ukraine. Those cannon fodder soldiers also have no choice about whether they enter Ukraine. They already live extremely brutal lives, with the consequence of refusing the orders of their leader likely being long-term imprisonment or death. So it's clear that North Korean soldiers are likely to enter Ukraine sooner rather than later. Our next question is, how worried should Ukraine be about this? Right now, the numbers of North Korean soldiers in Russia don't shift the dial dramatically in Russia's favor, according to Foreman. Instead, it's more of a sign of Putin's desperation. Dr. Jenny Mathers of Aberystwyth University suggests Ukraine still shouldn't approach the situation flippantly. This could just be step one, she says. Let's send a small number, see how it works on both sides. Mathers also points out that integration is going to be key for Russia. The BBC says the same thing in its report about the 3,000 soldiers. The language barrier is going to be an enormous problem for the North Korean soldiers. They may be familiar with the weapons they're expected to use, and their country has even produced many of them, but they don't speak Russian. Yet they're expected to figure out how to work alongside Russian units while communicating effectively, which doesn't seem likely. One analyst stationed in Russia, who the BBC says doesn't want to be named, points out that Putin had enough of a problem with integration when he introduced Russian prisoners into his military. It wasn't even that easy to include hundreds of Russian prisoners at first, and those guys all spoke Russian. How are the North Koreans supposed to integrate when Russian speakers have so many problems? That's an issue upon which Ukraine will hope to capitalize, especially if it results in Russia's North Korean contingent launching uncoordinated attacks that make them easy pickings for the far more experienced and cohesive Ukrainian units stationed in Kursk. That's assuming the North Koreans fight at all. On October 16th, Newsweek reported that some of the initial wave of North Korean soldiers had already deserted. Russia is actively looking for 18 troops who were deployed in the Kursk and Bryansk oblasts, just 4 miles from Russia's border with Ukraine. Commanders are apparently trying to conceal the desertions as the search is ongoing. That's a massive and perhaps unforeseen problem for Russia. The North Koreans heading into Russia to fight against Ukraine aren't going there by choice. Kim is forcing them to go under the threat of harsh penalties. If these 18 desertions occurring right at the beginning of North Korea entering the war are anything to go by, Russia is going to have a difficult time coordinating attacks with these soldiers. We can speculate as to the reasons why these desertions happen. Maybe the North Korean soldiers saw the reality of the Ukrainian threat facing them and decided they wanted no part of the fight. An equally possible reason is that some of these North Korean soldiers see being sent to Russia as a potential escape route out of North Korea. They're no longer in a country in which their every action is monitored, and they're taking advantage of that fact by disappearing into the ether. What does that mean for Ukraine? This lack of cohesiveness, coupled with desertion, which is surely going to become more common over time, suggests that Ukraine will be able to handle the North Korean troops entering Russia right now. That doesn't mean it faces no danger. If North Korea starts sending tens of thousands more soldiers, Ukraine is going to have to fight against most of them, even if some defect. A lack of training and an inability to communicate may not even matter much to Putin, as long as he has bodies to throw at a conflict that's already cost Ukraine and Russia so much. Therein lies the issue for Ukraine. It's now at war with North Korea, albeit not in a traditional sense. And if Kim is as determined to see the completion of Putin's special military operation as Russia's leader is, then we may see this war extend into several more years before Ukraine can come out on top. But what do you think about North Korea sending soldiers for Russia to use against Ukraine? Is this an experiment that could result in tens of thousands more North Koreans being sent to Ukraine as part of Putin's meat grinder? How do you think Ukraine will react to this influx of new soldiers? Share your thoughts in the comments, and thank you as always for watching the video.